Merry Christmas. Even though we're not together this Christmas, I hope that you found connections with others in our congregation, but also with family and friends. Our devotional this morning comes from the Lucan Christmas story, Luke 2, 1-7. Hear these words from our still speaking God. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the house. Thinking about that story, that Christmas text, the late New Testament scholar Raymond Brown wrote that Mary's heart was penetrated by a revelation that was unclear. He was, of course, writing about the angel's visit to Mary, announcing the news of her pregnancy. We have a tendency in our world to think that Mary just simply embraced everything the angel had to say that day. But I suspect it was more difficult than that. I think it took a while to sink in, especially considering everything Mary's pregnancy would mean. You know the story. The point that I want to make is that the Christmas story is actually both penetrating and pretty unclear. Mary heard the words. She embraced the idea, but the reality took a long time to mature for her. I suspect the same is true for us. There's simply more to the gift that we're receiving this year than we understand. Incarnation, God in flesh, baby Jesus, Christ the Lord. Maybe all we can do is start a conversation with all the hope that Christmas promises. Don't rush. Don't rush to interpret or understand or even feel Christmas, because sometimes it takes time for things like hope and belief to mature. I have a friend who, when his daughter was very little, her grandfather began a practice of giving her a savings bond every single Christmas. And when she was 6 years old, those pieces of paper didn't mean as much to her as a new doll or a toy. So they just kept them in a safe place for a while. But when that young woman went off to college, she was awfully thankful that both she and the bonds had matured, because sometimes it takes time to realize the value of what you've actually received. We are today just celebrating the birth of our hope. And if you don't understand how all of this is leading to peace in your own troubled heart, let alone peace on earth, take the promise to heart. And like Mary, you will eventually find that hope begins to make sense. Eventually. As the Gospel of Luke continues after the birth of Jesus, the next time we will meet Mary, Joseph, and their son, Jesus is 12 years old. His parents thought he was lost, but then they find him teaching the elders of the temple in Jerusalem. And when his mother actually starts to scold him, Jesus said, "Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And then we're told that Mary winds up treasuring all these things in her heart. And there it is again. It's that great internal conversation that Mary's been having since 12 years ago, when God did the very first thing in her life and brought Jesus into the world. According to all four Gospels, when Jesus began his ministry 30 years after his birth, apparently nobody knew about his miraculous birth. The glory alleluias of the shepherds, they weren't passed down, and nobody seemed to know about that. But Mary and her pondering heart were still thinking and reflecting on the story. She and Joseph were the only link between the baby and the man. And the growing conviction within them was something significant was happening to their son, something that began with this miraculous birth. So within Luke's gospel, we find this wonderful subplot of what's going on with Mary as her son begins to mature and begins to assume his messianic role. And then in the second volume of his writing, the book of Acts, Luke makes a point of placing Mary in the upper room with the other disciples while they're waiting and praying as Jesus told them to do. So when the Holy Spirit came with the power of a rushing wind at what we call Pentecost, Mary was there. And she was listening when the Spirit filled Peter and he began to preach, calling Jesus the Messiah, the Lord. In fact, the very words that the angels used. when they spoke to the shepherds. And so Mary begins to understand. It all comes together for her. The hope matures, and now she has what the shepherds had 33 years earlier. For her, the hope came not in a moment, but actually over the course of a lifetime of reflection and pondering and thinking and understanding. Christmas is actually about the beginning of our hope. And to receive this hope, all we have to do is to take our own place in the story this year. And if it's a wonderful time for you, then you find that, like the shepherds, you have the lines already written in your heart. Your role is to rejoice and go on glorifying and praising God, doing God's work. But if the message of Christmas seems a bit strange to you and strange to what you're feeling, then settle into Mary's role. Because if that's your part, if pondering is what makes the most sense to you, then it's enough for now to know that you belong in the story. You're not a stranger to this holy drama. The stranger is actually the hope that's been born into your life. And you don't have to understand the hope. You don't even have to be hopeful. All you have to do is to welcome and take the stranger in, and God will do the rest. And that's the good news of the Christmas story. God is with us. Always, always, always. Merry Christmas.